Welcome to Physiology session. Today we are discussing about special senses. We all know that there are four types of special senses, mainly sensation of vision, sensation of hearing, sensation of taste, and sensation of smell. Today we are focusing on sensation of vision. Now it is the structure of eye, and I'm going to discuss the most important parts about the eye anatomy, and then we are going to discuss about the visual pathway. So coming to the functional anatomy of eyeball, it contains orbital cavity, eyelids, conjunctiva, and lacrimal glands. The wall of eyeball contains mainly outer layer, middle layer, and inner layer. Outer layer includes cornea and sclera. Sclera is a white, tough, fibrous outer layer of the eyeball. It covers the posterior portion of the eyeball. At the same time, cornea will cover the anterior portion of the eyeball. It is a transparent, convex portion. Okay, and the middle layer will include choroid, ciliary body, and iris. Okay, choroid is a thin vascular structure of eyeball situated between sclera and retina. Okay, ciliary body is a thickened anterior part of middle layer of the eye situated between choroid and iris. Now coming to iris, it is a thin colored curtain-like structure of the eyeball located in front of the lens. Now it will constrict and release during the sympathetic and parasympathetic reflexes, and the next layer is inner layer, which contains the most important part of the eye, which is the retina. It contains 10 layers. We can discuss it later. Okay, and then here we can see the vitreous chamber and the aqueous chamber and the optic nerve, optic disc also. This is the structure of the eye. Now, from the front portion, we all are familiar with this, which is in the corner of the eye. There is a lacrimal gland or tear gland where the tear is produced, and the white portion is known as the sclera. This white portion is known as the sclera, and the most center portion is known as the pupil. Surrounding this, there is an iris which contains constrictor pupillae and dilator pupillae. This will constrict, contract, and relax during the light sensation. Now, this is the pupillary region, and this is the ciliary region. This is the lower eyelid. Okay. Now coming to the layers of retina, there are 10 layers of retina. Here the most important ones are these bipolar cells and ganglionic cells. I am just brushing up these details and layers. The first layer is pigment epithelium. This contains the pigment granules. Okay, and the second layer is, we can see here is a rods and cones, which are the light receptors. This is a layer of rods and cones. And there is a thin layer in between called external limiting membrane, and the next layer is outer nuclear layer, where the granules of rods and cones are situated. In the outer plexiform layer, it is a reticular meshwork, and the terminal fibers of rods and cones and dendrites of bipolar cells are situated. The bipolar cells are the first order neurons of visual pathway. It is situated in the inner nuclear layer. Okay, the axons of bipolar cells go inside and synapse with dendrites of ganglionic cells. The next layer is inner nuclear layer, where the inner plexiform layer, where the synapses will go on between the dendrites of ganglionic cells and axons of bipolar cells. In the layer of ganglionic cells, The ganglion cell, the ganglionic cells are situated. It is a second order neurons of the neurons in the visual pathway, and then the layer of nerve fibers will continue as the which is the optic nerve. Okay, now that is all about the layers of retina. Coming to photoreceptors, as I said before, there are rods and cones. Retina contain visual receptor, which is called the light sensitive receptor, photoreceptors, or electromagnetic receptor. These visual receptors are called rods and cones. There are important functions of rods and cones. Rods are mainly responsible for dim light vision or night vision or photopic vision. In case of night vision, or the light is in lower intensity, the rods will play an important role. Okay, it will not take part in the visual acuity or color vision, which means the vision of rod is a white, or in combination of black and white, which means it will be a combination of black, white, or gray. Okay, so that the colored object will appear faded or grayish in twilight. Coming to the functions of cones, cones have eye threshold to light stimulus. So the cones are sensitive only to the bright light. So that these receptors are called bright light receptors of bright light vision or daylight vision or photopic vision. Cones are also responsible for acuity of vision and the color vision. Now let's discuss about field of vision. What do you remember field of vision? It is a part of the external world seen by one eye when it is fixed on the one direction is called field of vision or visual field of that eye. Okay, when we see in a one direction, the field of one eye, which in one direction is known as the field of direction, which is of two types: binocular vision and monocular vision. We all are familiar with the binoculars. So then the binocular vision is the vision in which both the eyes are used together, mainly in in human and some animals. The eyeballs are placed in front of the head. So the visual field of both eyes will overlap. But in the case of some animals, their eyes are on the both sides, so that monocular vision will take place. It is a vision in which the eye is used separately. In some animals like dog, rabbit, and horse, the eyeballs are present at the sides of head. So the visual field of both eyes overlap to a very small extent. Okay, so the field of vision is of two types: monocular vision and binocular vision. Okay, divisions of visual field. There are four different visual fields: temporal field, nasal field, upper field, and lower field. Let's discuss it with a diagram. Coming to temporal and nasal fields, here we can see if the left eye and right eye is divided vertically, then the outer portion is known as the temporal field and the inner region is known as the nasal field. At the same time, if the left eye and the right eye is divided horizontally, the upper field is known as this is known as the upper field, and the lower region is known as the lower field. Okay, now let us discuss about the visual pathway. It is the most important topic in the sensation of vision. The visual pathway or optic pathway is a nervous pathway that transmits impulse from retina visual center in the cerebral cortex. The visual receptors are, as we all know, they are rods and cones. These are the 10 layers of retina. We have discussed this before. Here we have to discuss the most important points which is the bipolar neurons, which is the first order neurons in the visual pathway, and the ganglionic cells, which is in the layer of ganglionic cells, is the second order neurons of the visual pathway. Coming to the first order neuron, we all know that I have said before the bipolar cells in the retina are the first order neuron. Axons from the bipolar cells synapse with the dendrites of ganglionic cells. And the second order neurons are the ganglionic cells. In the ganglionic cell layer of retina, axons of ganglionic cells form optic nerve. And the next is third order neurons, which are the lateral geniculate body. The fibers arising from here reaches the visual cortex in the brain. Now the course of visual pathway, the first one is optic nerve, and the next is optic chiasma, optic tract, and it will reach the lateral geniculate body, and then the optic radiation, and finally these fibers will reach at the visual cortex, and now the vision is possible. Let us explain each of these terms in detail. Coming to optic nerve is formed by the axons of ganglionic cells. It leaves the eye through optic disc. The impulses from nasal half of eye forms the temporal fibers, and the impulses from temporal half of eye forms the nasal fibers. Which means in this diagram we can see the temporal field and the nasal field. The fibers from the nasal eye field will form the temporal fibers. These red color fibers are known as the temporal fibers. At the same time, the fibers from the temporal field will form the nasal fibers. Nasal fibers are the blue fibers. It will cross. Okay, they are the crossed fibers. It will cross and form the optic chiasma. At the same time, temporal fibers will not cross and they are called the uncrossed fibers. Okay, these crossed fibers will form the optic chiasma. Next is optic chiasma. The medial fibers of each optic nerve cross the midline and join the uncrossed lateral fibers of optic side to form the optic tract. This area of crossing of the optic nerve fiber is known as the what? Optic chiasma. Okay. Now, the optic tract is formed by the uncrossed fibers or temporal fibers of the optic nerve on the same side and crossed fibers of optic nerve from the opposite side. Okay. Next is lateral geniculate body, which is a third order neuron of the visual pathway. Majority of these fibers of optic tract terminate in the lateral geniculate body, which forms the subcortical center for the visual sensation. Okay. Next is optic radiation. The fibers from lateral geniculate body pass through the internal capsule and form the optic radiation. Okay. And finally, these fibers will reach the visual cortex. The primary cortical center for vision is called as the visual cortex, which is located on the medial surface of occipital lobe. This is a flowchart of visual pathway, from which we will start with the visual receptors in the retina, which is the bipolar neurons. Okay, the bipolar cells in the inner nuclear layer of the retina. And second order neurons are the ganglionic cell in the ganglionic cell layer of the retina. It will form the optic nerve and then optic chiasma and optic tract. It is the course of the visual pathway and this will reach the third order neuron, which is the lateral geniculate body. And this will form the optic radiation and finally these fibers will reach the visual cortex. Okay, so the first order neurons are the bipolar cells in the inner nuclear layer and the second order neurons are the ganglionic cell in the ganglionic cell layer and at the same time the third order neurons are the lateral geniculate body. So this is about the visual part. So this is the visual pathway diagram. Here we can see the fibers will start from the temporal field and the light reflects and these nasal fibers will form. So from the temporal field, the nasal fibers will form and it will cross, which is known as the optic chiasma, and reaches the and forms the optic tract and the lateral geniculate body, and finally it reaches the visual cortex. Likewise, the light will reflect on the nasal field of the eye. It will forms the temporal fibers, the red fibers, and it is the uncrossed fibers. This will also form the optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, and it will reach the lateral geniculate body, which is the third order neuron, and finally it will form the optic radiation and visual cortex. Now, coming to the applied physiology, the effect of lesion at different level of visual pathway. Okay, two diseases are mainly discussed, which is anopia and hemianopia. Anopia is complete loss of vision, and hemianopia means loss of vision in one half of visual field. Okay, which is known as the hemianopia. Hemianopia is mainly classified into two types: homonymous hemianopia and heteronymous hemianopia, which means here we can see the temporal and nasal eye division. This is the left visual field and this is the right visual field. Here we can see we have discussed about homonymous hemianopia and heteronymous hemianopia. So if the same side of the visual field is lost, or loss of vision happens in the same visual field, if it is a right, it is known as a right homonymous hemianopia, or if it is a left side, it is the left homonymous hemianopia. At the same time, if two temporal regions, the vision from two temporal regions are lost, it is known as a bitemporal heteronymous hemianopia. And if the loss of vision is of two binasal visual field, two nasal visual field, it is known as the binasal heteronymous hemianopia. In this way, we can discuss about the lesions of visual cortex. Here we can see pressure on uncrossed lateral fibers, which means the temporal fibers, so that which region will get lost, which region, which visual field will lost, nasal region, because this is uncrossed fibers and the light is reflected from the nasal region. So it is left or right nasal hemianopia. At the same time, lateral fibers of both sides are affected. So the lateral fibers, the red fibers of both sides are affected, so that it will form the binasal hemianopia. Okay. And the compression of nasal fiber, that is crossed fiber, these are the nasal fiber, blue ones are the nasal fiber. This will, if the vision is lost from the nasal fiber or any pressure or lesion happens on the nasal fibers, the vision of temporal visual field will lost. So it will cause the bitemporal hemianopia. This is all about the lesion of the optic chiasm. So now let's wind up the session. Thank you.